Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke.Academy. Welcome to another episode of UnWoke.Academy. We actually suffered some pretty strong storms here in our home turf. Last week we had no power at our HQ for a great number of days. Thankfully we have some generators and those sorts of things that kept us up and running. You saw I was able to kind of put some things together and get an episode out just to maintain that flow of information about the wokadoodle far left and their undue influence in the world of finance. We're going to keep getting that message out there because together, rising tides raises all boats. We can team up together to get rid of the wokadoodle globalist, anti-American far left in the world of finance. And if we are successful, when we are successful at defunding them, we can cut the head off of this nasty global communist serpent. So without further ado, I want to give a quick tip of the hat to our friends over at OBBM Network. They've been great to work with. If you also have content that you want to get out, contact OBBM Network. They're great distribution partners and a lot more. They have helped and encouraged us in a number of ways that are kind of indescribable. I could probably do a whole episode on the friends at OBBM Network. By the way, if you're on Roku, you can stream OBBM for content like this. You can also find OBBM as an app on Roku. If you are looking for financial planning and advice, contact Matt and Drew over at Inspire. We've talked about them before. Actually, they've been guests on this program. I'm going to try to include in the show notes and maybe at the conclusion their contact information. Check out their website. Those guys have offered to do what's called an impact report to show, in my terms, how wokadoodle your financial picture is. So they'll look at the investments in your portfolio and give you feedback on how your investments are doing. By the way, here's a pro tip. The non-woke investments, those managers out there, mutual funds and the like, that didn't go woke, there's great data out there showing that those managers are actually doing better financially. So you can have your cake and eat it too. If you haven't contacted or gone over to the Financial PMA website, check it out. As of 4th of July, we're up and running and we're off to the races with great feedback coming in. And we're going to be reporting on the steps that we take on behalf of those people who are now in the Financial PMA. We've launched the world's first financial private membership association. It is financialpma.com. That is a private membership association for those of us who care about the financial lives that we lead. More housekeeping notes. If you are able to subscribe to this content on whichever platform you're watching on, great, hoorah, we love to have you. Everything does go public. Everyone can view everything. So if you're not able to support us financially, don't worry. You get the content. There's just maybe we want to try and we want to show respect and show some love to those folks who are supporting us financially. They may actually get the content 3 days ahead. That's it. That's the difference. We'd love to have the financial support. Since we fell under weaponized regulator attack, it was attack from weaponized regulators for 28 months. It was exhausting. The writing was on the wall. We knew we had to pivot and go into a different direction that allows us to continue to expose the wokadoodle far left. I'm going to just call it the global communist banking network that want to control everything. By the way, Wall Street is a term I think we need to just get jettisoned, because I don't think there is a Wall Street anymore. Wall Street is so financially hijacked, generally speaking, right now, that the move is exactly polar opposite American interests right now. It is anything, it's actually basically America last. It seems to be the perspective of many of the firms that I talk to. Speaking of platforms, if you are finding this on like Twitter or Truth Social or one of those, head on over to unwoke.academy. That's for now where most everything is housed. So you're going to find a lot more content than just this video. There are posts, exposés on the companies that have gone woke etc. And one last piece, if you are looking for life insurance, we've got a great new friend and partner now. I shouldn't say partner. He is a strategic ally in Steve Coburn at Coburn Insurance. Steve Coburn started the Gallery of Freedom Fighters a long time ago and was nice enough to include me as a guest. So you can find me on there. I don't even remember what I said, but hopefully you like whatever it is that I said while interviewed by Steve Coburn some months ago. Since then, we've struck up a friendship and we've been off to the races. If you end up liking Matt and Drew over at Inspire, or Steve Coburn, or some of the other recommendations that we hope to be able to make to you, know that some of those are strategic partnerships and some of their revenue comes back to fund us. It keeps episodes like this up and running. It keeps us going and keeps a roof over our heads and keeps the research flowing. So without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about forced behavior. By now, you've probably heard about something called the Social Equity Index or Social Credit Score. That social credit score, the intention for that, not just on a national level, but we're seeing it already. We've seen it for a long time now in communist China, and it's starting to roll out in places in Europe, like the UK, that's gone far left, and they're embracing this stuff. And there's kind of a lot to unpack here, but I want to show you an indication of what you should expect. And that goes back to corporate behaviors and ties in with finance. And there's a lot of sort of conditioning of society that's happening right now. And we need to know it, understand it, and be prepared to resist it. There are a number of things that are going into forcing people into behaving in a certain way. Like, for instance, if you look at some of the social media platforms, they're really already to the point where they're forcing people to sort of self-censor. People know over the past 4 years, there are certain things that you have to use code words and use symbols instead of letters inside of certain words, or they get flagged and you get penalized, etc. That's social conditioning. It is conditioning us not to value the First Amendment rights that we have any longer. So connected to that, we've got now indications coming out of the UK, the United Kingdom and England specifically, that law enforcement are going after people who express certain viewpoints or even just simply like and forward a post on social media platforms. That's outrageous and should terrify everybody. Connected to that, we've got discussion of centralized banking digital currency. I know we've addressed this before, but bear with me. We're taking this in a little different direction today than we've talked about in the past. So the intention of centralized banking digital currency is for big government to control all money and your access to it. So that ties in with all kinds of kooky wackadoodle concepts like universal basic income. By the way, there are reports that came out a few weeks ago that universal basic income was tested in the United States in communities in Texas and Illinois, and there are no major news coverage because it turns out it was a dramatic failure. It failed significantly. So what ended up happening, I think some people were selected in these communities in Texas and Illinois who had income, family income below, I want to say it was like $19,000 or something. They cut this threshold, and some families were selected, and those families were given $1,000 a month on the backs of we, the taxpayers. So for 3 years, $1,000 extra per month was just given to them. And the result is atrocious and awful. Roughly 0% of them managed to find their way to a better life. They didn't get any additional education. They didn't find a better job. They didn't create any more sustainable, worthwhile income, no accreditation, no advancement of basically any type. That's what we're hearing. So If those tests had been successful in those two states, you can bet you the media would be all over it and look how great it is and everything. It just quietly happened, and only a few conservative outlets picked up on the test results, the examination results, and reported on it. So going back to centralized banking digital currency, part of the intention is to create some sort of ongoing financial incentive to force certain social behaviors, which means if there were some sort of universal basic income, which is basically the taxpayers and those few corporations out there that are left to be able to survive have to pay massive amounts of additional tax in order to create the revenue that is then handed to people who work less or not at all. And that's in exchange for votes. That's how communism is built, basically. So and then of course, that centralized banking digital currency is the mechanism through which government sort of metes out, hands out these handouts, and then controls who can use them. So it can be, in places like communist China, it is attached to your social behavior. So if you misbehave, let's say that you comment online that you don't approve of President Xi Jinping and you don't like the Communist Party, that gets a ding, and maybe you get less money, or you don't get any money at all put into your account. It forces people to first become reliant upon these handouts, and then once you are, you can only continue to get those handouts if you behave in a certain way. Good. Now that we've got all that out and you understand the concept behind this nefarious, nasty stuff, let's talk about the behaviors of certain corporations. Last week, we had, what was it, Harley-Davidson and Dunkin' Donuts were the two most recent to be exposed for going woke-a-doodle far left. And then before that, I mean, of course, we've had Target and we've had Disney and Anheuser-Busch, which is the parent company of Bud Light, and all kinds of other companies. We had Tractor Supply and John Deere Tractor. All these companies leave people sort of scratching their heads. Ford and Chevy are another two more great examples. So people wonder, why is it? Why all of a sudden are these companies doing wackadoodle far left stuff, like embracing LGBTQ plus agenda and, you know, having a drag queen reading hour for children and whatever, and having some man dressed as a woman be the mascot and all that stuff. So why is that happening? It's important to understand why it's happening, because it's an indication of what's intended for us at an individual level. There is something called the Corporate Equity Index. Remember this, it's fundamentally important to businesses and corporate behaviors. The Corporate Equity Index is this, it's the corporate equivalent of a social credit score. The Corporate Equity Index forces corporations to jump through crazy, ridiculous, far left hoops in order to get a high score on their Corporate Equity Index, which then leads to them being able to conduct business. At a high level, that's effectively how it works. It is both stick and carrot. It is the enticement to corporations. If you have a high enough credit score in this made up, this Corporate Equity Index, by the way, if you're not already mortified of the use of the word equity, you should be. It is communism instilled into all facets of life. It is the opposite of equality. We want equality, and it's sort of ingrained in Western society. We want to be treated as equals. That means in the eyes of the law, it means in access to education and upward mobility and our ability to make something of ourselves. The equality baked into Western society and Judeo-Christian principles is what has led to the tremendous success of places like the United States. Equity it plans to flip that on its head and create equal outcomes for all based upon the government control and government definitions. So it means that everybody effectively gets dumbed down and neutered, and all upward mobility really it disappears. The only way to create any sort of advancement ability is to get into the Communist Party and advance yourself within the Communist Party, because that means power, money, and control. Outside of the Communist Party, there is none. There is no power, money, control, or upward mobility. That's the key difference between equity and equality. So anyway, back to the corporate equity index. The corporate equity index, or CEI for short, is forced on these corporations, and they are told they have to do certain things and behave in a certain way. And that's dictated effectively by globalist banks. You have World Economic Forum and World Bank and places like it that have far too much power and control over corporations and how they behave, and most importantly, money, how money is accessed, because all these corporations, they need access to capital to continue to grow and flourish. But they also, in addition to that, they need access to global markets. So that means getting access to labor, and then shipping and logistics, and then ports of harbor to be able to load frigates and haul things overseas by mass transport, and then gain access to other countries via import-export. All of that stuff, effectively, it has fallen under the control of some really bad actors. And they can control that, and they can tell corporations, if you don't behave in a certain way, you can't have any of that, or your terms are really bad. Maybe you get bumped down on your shipping order, and it just takes forever for your shipment to get out of a port or facility and then into another country like the United States. They also control the access to capital, which means those companies out there that need to borrow to expand, to make payroll, etc. And they do that a lot. It's kind of how major corporations run. They're constantly borrowing and then building, and very few these days maintain their own autonomous and independent balance sheet. By the way, there's another element of this that gets into proxy voting and how corporate boards are forced into certain behaviors that way as well. But I'm going to save that for a different discussion. Today, we're focused on the corporate equity index. So this corporate equity index, it is, as I said, it's a stick and a carrot. And those people that control all of that stuff, that global infrastructure, that power structure of shipping ports and lanes and you name it, airports and airplanes and ports of entry all over the world, and labor pools and currency exchanges if you need to go in and out of different currencies. The people that control all that stuff, they've gained control, and they have instituted this corporate equity index. In another discussion, we can get into some of the names of the people that are behind all that, but just think the billionaire cabal. It's a global oligarchy, and they control much of the entry and exit of places, many of the ports of entry all over the continent of Africa, in places like Vietnam, where a lot of companies go for cheap labor, Haiti, much of South America, etc. Anyway, that hopefully makes sense to you, and you can see why we're seeing those things and why groups like UnWoke Academy keep exposing the woke-a-doodle and the proxy voting and the pressure from corporate equity index that leads to bad behavior, etc. But now let's get back to you, because that forced behavior, it doesn't stop at the corporate level. There is no intention to stop at controlling corporations. The intention is to control down to the individual level and control what you say and do and what your children say and do, more importantly. So what's being presented and built now in K through 12 education, in particular in the United States, is this acceptance of data mining, social mining and connecting your access to things and reward system with your social behavior. That's happening now. It's big in K through 12 education. That's why all the surveys and all the data mining and all the free, I'm going to air quote that, those are never free, those free the laptops and computers and all that stuff. All of that has massive amounts of data mining, and each step it's teaching children, if they behave a certain way, for instance, embracing child sexuality and LGBTQ plus agenda, then great things are rewarded upon them. But if they step out of line slightly and say, accidentally admit that their family is Christian, or heaven forbid that they talk about their really anything that they might mention that falls out of line with the agenda of the oligarchy corporatist narrative, they get dinged and there is a punishment. And we've seen that. Actually, I can go back 5 years ago, and I was specifically relayed a story of a extreme racism in a school district. And it's actually given the blessing, it's given the seal of approval. I've been into school board meetings where this sort of thing happens, where there is this tacit across the board acceptance of certain racist narratives, and it's horrifying. And again, it goes back to that whole equity thing. But in this one scenario, and this was relayed to me by a parent, there was a child who was a straight A student, and this student prided himself on it, and went in, submitted some sort of written essay composition piece in a high school environment, and was given, I think, a B- or something. And the student was mortified. Straight A student, really driven to succeed. And then the student engaged the teacher and challenged them. Why did you give me this grade? There are no bad marks on it. There are no red marks anywhere. The student was led into the hallway and effectively told that the student, because that student is white and living in America, that they could never possibly understand because they won the lottery. That's effectively the answer that this teacher gave. That's an indication of parts of where K through 12 education is, and it's definitely headed further in that direction. It all ties in with the machinations and manipulations of the LGBTQ plus agenda. It's part of the reason that America has fallen to roughly dead last in developed nations for education. And places like where I live, Ohio has fallen to 38th in the nation, while also softening our academic proficiency standards, which is terrible. It's just horrifying across the board. But what that's doing, it's creating a future generation that is dumb enough to fall into the trap of the stick and carrot reward system, enforced social behavior. So to sum things up, when you look at the behaviors of some of these wokeadoodle far left companies and you want to boycott, the first thing to know is take it one step further. Don't just boycott, vote your values. Find companies that are better, that are not embracing or caving into the globalist DEI, CRT, CEI narrative, this pressure, and most importantly, make sure that you're not funding that stuff through your IRA, your 401k, and investment accounts. That's what we're here for. That's what folks like Matt and Drew at Inspire are here for. That's why we have the financial PMA. So those things that you see, that bad corporate behavior, it's an indication of what's planned for you in the future if we're not careful. I'm Jonathan Broadbent. Thanks for listening.